Colin. What's up, buddy? Long time no
Oh,
see
it's,
from like 30 seconds ago.
I know. It's been a while, Mac.
So
It's,
long, so
it's
long.
good. It's good to hear your voice again.
Yeah, I was, for folks who are just joining, I was trying to think back to the last time that I saw Colin and Chris. And I know Colin, at least, I was out in San Francisco and had a random random like business meeting out that way. And so like I think I came and like hassled you to come show me the studio, even though it was like a Friday. And I know like Fridays are always like the day that like everything is due, like it is today for us. And I had like 100 coffees in my system, so I'm just jittering around. And I know I could tell you were like, man, this kid is just so hyped up on coffee. I got all this stuff that I'm trying to deliver. Like, what am I doing?
No, I feel like you're such an extrovert, Mac. It's hard to tell whether you're hyped up on coffee or just psyched on life. So
Yeah, also true. That's a fair point. That's a fair point.
I know it's good.
Yeah, bottle up some of that Mac energy. Well, if it's like osmosis. You hang around me long enough, it kind of comes out, or I guess it just annoys people and you want to leave. I don't know. Find out. We'll let a few folks kind of trickle in here, but how's life? How's things been going? Have y'all kind of gotten back into the studio working? Is everyone still kind of working remotely at this point?
No, we're still working remote. Yeah, and we're looking. People are starting to get vaccinated, so that the outlook of getting back to the studio is good. Like when we actually pull the trigger, still kind of remains to be seen. We actually have a studio project going on at the moment. We're building out a new studio. So there's going to be a little brief moment where we're sort of in between studios and kind of looking for the completion of the construction for the new studio as sort of our go-to date for getting everyone back in the same room.
That's super exciting. We're kind of in a similar boat where we've kind of had this smaller space for a while, and with the pandemic and everything that happened and we all pivoted to working remotely, our landlord has actually been really flexible, and so kind of this opportunity came up. So we're actually looking for new space as well. So we're still all remote. We haven't gone back to the studio, but it's kind of exciting because we're like in that same game of like, all right, what do we want? What do we want the next 5 years to be like? It's like exciting, but also adds like a whole new dynamic of pressure to the conversation too, because you got to think about like what you want to grow into. So that's really interesting.
That's awesome. Our landlord was not flexible. We basically had to pay for the most expensive server room for the last year.
Oh no. Oh,
Really
I could definitely relate to that. To that. Well, cool. Well, I think we got some more folks joining. I'm going to give a quick introduction around. So welcome everyone to another Mograph lunch. I think this is episode 9 that we're doing. So learning a lot of things along the way. I think one of the things is to bring in more voices into the conversation and more folks from around the area who can kind of weigh in, from studios to freelancers, things like that. So my name is Matt Garrison. I'm one of the co-founders and executive producers at Dash, and I'm joined by Colin and Chris, founders and ECDs at Oddfellows. Welcome, guys. Glad to have you on a Mograph lunch.
Thanks, Mac.
Awesome. Did you like how formal that was? It was like I prepared for it, like it's like a real podcast, but it's not a real podcast,
I think you have a future in this, Mac.
During the pandemic, this is total sidebar. I've been waking up super early and going on these old man walks, is what I call them. Cause like I'm not young enough where I feel like I want to work out. Like I'm not there anymore, but I can get up and like grab a coffee and walk around town. So the only people who are up at like 7 a.m., walking around are the old people. And so I give them a couple of coffee waves and stuff like that. So I think I'm just prepping for that retirement just earlier than normal, I guess. Well, guys, thanks so much for hopping on this call. Really today, I think it can be kind of open-ended. And for folks listening in, I've structured a handful of questions that I can throw y'all's way to get a little bit of background stuff. And then towards the end of this, opening it up for the audience to see if anyone else has any questions. I've taken a few from our Instagram poll that we had up as well. So yeah, we can just kind of see where things go. But I feel like a great place to start would really be where Oddfellows started. I remember, at least for me, starting Dash was never something that I like truly planned. Like it just sort of kind of happened and then kind of came to fruition. It was like I started getting work, I was freelancing on the side of my job, and I was like, man, maybe this is the time to do it. 10 years, man, that's a long time. I read this book that was talking about why most small businesses fail, and it was something crazy, like 89% of like small businesses like don't make it past year 5, if that puts things in perspective. So like the fact that y'all have made it 10 years is not only a testament to you're doing something right, but you're doing something really well. So really big props on that.
those opportunities where we teamed up always were more meaningful, I think, to us than, just sort of freelancing around at agencies. And I think the process of freelancing at agencies was always a little bit frustrating to some extent and convoluted. And so just having sort of this streamlined connection between us and sort of the company that we were working for without the middleman, I think was very enticing for us.
Did y'all in
Yeah,
those early days, like, you know, I just remember like one of the things that was always a big worry of mine, like transitioning from working at a studio, because I was at an agency as well. That's what my background was right before I started Dash with Corey. And I just remember the conversation of like, how do we sustain this? Like, it's kind of worried that I would have enough money to like keep it up, without that like constant work. And particularly, it sounds like you guys kind of met up with a bunch of other freelancers who had that same thought mentality. How were y'all going about sharing the work? Would y'all like bring in a couple of people? Was everyone sharing all the freelance work that was coming in and it was like, cool, we're a studio? Or would you just kind of work with each other and just pay the person that you're working with? Like, how did kind of that financial side of it initially work?
well, it was three of us initially. So it was Chris, myself, and another guy, Conrad McLeod, who was, I think, freelancing in New York now. And we'd all kind of stop down and take on a project if it was big enough, or if it was a smaller ask. One of us would take it, and the other two of us would continue sort of freelancing around town. But I feel like the ball got rolling pretty quickly. Hey, Chris? I feel like there was maybe like a 6-month sort of bleed in between freelancing and Oddfellows, and then eventually there was sort of enough work there to take the plunge.
Well, it's such a random connection. I think, Chris, I found out about you in this industry, I think through a video you made about maybe announcing that your wife was pregnant. Is that right? Did you make like a little like tank or something, and like that was like, I don't know, like like announcement video? I mean, maybe I'm totally off here. And if so, then this sounds like the weirdest thing ever. Like, Mac, what are you talking about? But was that right? Yeah, all right. Yeah, that's literally how I found you. And I think what was really funny about that is I saved it because I was like, oh, that's a cool video, right? I was like, oh, that's super fun. This guy Chris seems like he knows what he's doing. That's really cool. Saved it. And then I didn't even put it together that it was y'all and you with Oddfellows, until later on. And then I was like, wait a minute, like, I've made the connection. So that's really funny. But yeah, I think, starting, just knowing that I don't personally have any kids, but I know some of our staff does. And, this particular year, how much of a struggle it's been, just working from home, trying to take care of your toddler while also trying to be productive at work. It's a lot. And so the idea of like trying to start a studio and cutting together reels, when you got newborns, I can only imagine that was probably a lot of work initially. One question that like I always get a lot from folks, particularly folks who are like coming into the industry, whether it's freelancers or people who are just starting a studio, is always like, how do I get this work? Like, how do I land work? How do I get these clients? And, it's funny now looking back after 5 years of doing this, and y'all are looking back at like 10 years of doing this, I'd be curious your take on how you felt like that came to be. I have my own personal thoughts on it, but I'd be curious to hear from y'all first on like how you felt like that work kind of came in initially and what you kind of credit doing to be able to bring in some of that work.
It's a good question. I mean, I think like our previous sort of experience, I think we were working in the industry for a long time before we made the jump. And so we had a lot of sort of great connections to pull on, coming out of an agency, having some client contacts, also like jumping over to Autofuss, which is basically like a startup motion studio that became a robotics company. A lot of clients kind of came through there. We sort of saw kind of what it took to some degree to start a studio. And then I think, Chris and I were freelancing around town for a really long time. And so when all of a sudden we were off the market, I think people were sort of fine kind of hiring Oddfellows to do the job instead of hiring Chris and I as sort of individuals. And so already there was kind of just a natural pool of work sort of sitting there for us.
Interesting. Yeah, it was literally almost identical for Corey and myself. Because like, at the time I was still animating and so was Corey. And so like, it was basically just two of us freelancers coming together. And once people heard like, oh, Corey and Mac are no longer with that agency, yeah, let's just hire them for like freelancers, right? And then you eventually start getting enough work and it starts rolling in, and it's kind of like a snowball effect where it kind of builds from that stuff, I guess, But it kind of just reiterates, I think, like the importance of just making connections and like, even if you feel like it's a slog and it's not really what you want to do, it's still important to like be friendly with everyone, reach out to other people, get to know folks in your industry, because they're ultimately the folks that will eventually be hiring you for the most part.
Yeah, I think networking is huge, and just keeping good relationships with people, and if you can add value to what they're bringing to you and make their life easier, then I think that work should continue to roll in.
Do you feel like that's been a big impetus and reason that you've kind of gotten your portfolio to where it is now? Because I think like a lot of folks in our industry would look at what Oddfellows has made and what y'all are doing consistently and be like, wow, that's like the dream. Like, these projects all look fun, they all look great, these are all things that I want to be a part of. Do you feel like that was a result of just perpetually kind of pushing little things here and there into an aesthetic that you wanted to do? Or like, how do you feel like you kind of shaped that portfolio to where it is now, over the years? So,
I mean,
sorry,
I'd
that
say
was an intense question.
no, yeah, I'm just trying to like unpack it a little bit.
Tell us your success story and how you did it. Unpackage 10 years and let me write down how to do it.
I mean, I think every personal project we did definitely helped sort of push us forward. I think there was even like an early sort of passion project we did at the agency that we worked for called The Experiment, which was a sort of a collage kind of like 15-second piece that landed us sort of a motionographer feature at the time. And so I think like, yeah, I think, being able to sort of like truly show kind of like our taste and where kind of our artistic skill was at the moment, I think sort of helped kind of show clients what was possible, and also inform maybe some of the commercial work that would come sort of after those projects.
No, that's a really good point. I guess like kind of like the root of some of that conversation, what I was trying to get to too, is like, how much of there is like a conscious plan on kind of like where you were going? Like, did y'all kind of know, like I was looking at your website just before we hopped on the call, and, I went to like, I think your like staff page, and I was kind of blown away. Like, I think y'all have maybe like what, 15 people, something along those lines?
We're at like 25 now. Actually.
You're crazy. Yeah, well, that gives me stress because I know what 11 people on payroll does for me. So good luck sleeping at night with 25. But yeah, no, I just remember seeing that, and like I think the last time I'd been on your site or looked around, it was maybe like half that, a little bit more. And so I guess a question would be like, did y'all ever have like a scale in mind, or like how big you wanted to get, or kind of like what an end goal was? Was there always something you were kind of working to? Has it kind of just been like an evolving process over the last 10 years?
Yeah, I think some of the impetus for growing too was just that we had gaps in what we could do. So there's cool kind of creative opportunities coming our way that we just had sort of no expertise for. So sort of a clear example of that is like Chris and I definitely come from more of sort of a shapy, animated kind of traditional Mograph world, and character design and animation scared the crap out of us.
Right.
And so one of our first hires is actually a traditional animator, Stan Cameron. And bringing him on was so scary at the time because, obviously Mac, first employee, you're responsible for their livelihood now.
Yeah, they're choosing you for their career, and that way you
exactly.
Feel it,
You're like, oh man, did you make a good choice? No.
Right.
But it was like clear, like immediately, just how much value like someone like that brought to the company. Kind of filled in sort of these gaps that Chris and I had. And so I think, as you sort of evolve as a studio, I think you spot, deficits you have as a creative outlet, and you try to fill those. And that's sort of what's led us to, how many people we have now, I'd say.
Do you feel like, I know one thing that, I always struggle with a little bit too is like, going back to that first employee, I still carry that feeling with all of our employees to a certain degree, where I want to make sure that when I bring them on, that we have enough work that we think in the pipeline, or can be as predictive as we can in a very unpredictable industry, that work's going to be there to a certain degree to keep everyone around. Did y'all ever have like a rule of thumb, like as far as like when it felt good to like bring on a new employee? Was it always kind of like on the heels of like a big project that was winning, or stuff that you felt like you could plan ahead for a little bit longer, or just kind of like maybe when the pressure was like, man, everyone's working a ton right now, I think we like really need to bring someone else on? Because I know it's something that I personally struggle with as a studio owner. when is the right time to bring someone on? You want to like press as much as you can without extending yourselves, but also recognizing, to your point, when there's like weak areas or new areas you want to bring into the studio. I was just curious if y'all had any thoughts on that.
I think there's a few reasons like why we would hire people too. I think, one is sort of what I was talking about before, where it's just an investment in, filling in a gap that we have, being able to take on more creative opportunities. Like Chris said, I think in the beginning, like the way we hired people, it was just purely based off, sense. Like,
yeah, right.
do we have enough work? I think now we're like more intentional. Like I think every year we'll look back and see how many freelancers we employed and how many days they were kind of on with us over the course of the year. And I think that's a pretty clear indicator, based off sort of the numbers that you're seeing, whether you should be hiring or staying kind of where you are.
No, that's really smart. And I actually think that was like one of the impetuses for like Corey and I even deciding that we wanted to bring on people ourselves too, is like we started looking at like, we were hiring freelancers out to help us with projects, as we started to get bigger. And I was like, wow, we're paying a lot of money out, that this could be a full-time role, so, that's probably a good indicator as well. I think that's something that like, I wish someone had told me sooner rather than later, is like the importance of like data. Like we're so caught up in like the creative and like what that output is, right? And like that's still a very important aspect of what we do, because people are going to hire you based on the quality of your work you can create. But we're also in this world where it's kind of data driven creative. Like you have to look at some of the data and numbers that kind of come in behind that stuff. And so like I wish I had started collecting some more of that information like sooner rather than later in the course of our growth. Like really being granular on how long certain tasks take us to do, really being granular on how long or how much we're spending on a specific, 3D role for freelancers as opposed to just animation roles, right? Versus editors or things like that. So like being a little bit more granular, I think like if I was starting it now, I'd probably track that more, because all that stuff really just makes those decisions when like, should we be growing? Should we bring people in? Just makes it a lot easier, I think, down the road.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, with you guys having, you said 25 people, is that right? Now, I noticed that on your site when I was cruising around, one of the things that popped out to me was that you guys have kind of rebranded a little bit and are now calling yourselves a content agency versus a studio. Yeah, it's really interesting because like you try to balance the line, because you're more than just people who like execute on something, right? It's like you're coming up with your ideas, you're writing scripts, you're taking it from start to finish. And does like a word like studio kind of pigeonhole you into people who are just like executing off the work, when really you have greater visions for what you want that work to do in the world and like what it does outside of it? And then you're starting to get into some of the stuff that maybe agencies deal with. Do you feel like at the end of the day, like with what you guys are like kind of pushing into, does it still all feel pretty motion related in that? Or do you guys ever see yourself kind of pulling off or pushing into some other creative deliverables outside of something that would be in motion?
I think we're already doing some of that. I think the stuff that we tackle is pretty diverse. I think like Chris said, the bread and butter of what we do is still, very sort of grounded in just traditional motion design. But I think, we've done some websites, we've done some branding projects, on a handful of projects, we've done brand strategy from, the very beginning, all the way through the kind of the execution of a project and a deliverable. And so, yeah, I think we like to just be, very thoughtful about the projects that we take on. And so getting to take on the whole thing and really, think about it from the very beginning, form a plan and then see that plan like all the way through execution is the thing that kind of excites us the most.
Do you feel like that's something that was like a relatively new decision? Because I would say like even from like the early days, y'all definitely had a pretty like consistent palette, consistent type of work that you could kind of expect on an Oddfellows page or Oddfellows project. But I do feel like, as you're saying, now dealing with branding and stuff, you've really pushed away from that. Do you feel like that's something that like after kind of being more of a specialist for a while was sort of direction that you were kind of burning yourself out a little bit, and that was the impetus for like broadening it, kind of being more of a generalist in that side of things?
I think I think every few years, we just sort of are looking for new creative challenges. I think the idea of like, like Chris said, like doing one style and then just doing it forever is just daunting and a little depressing to me personally.
Yeah, no, for sure.
So I think when we get a good handle on something, we're just always kind of looking for like a new creative challenge. And, our ambition is not to just be able to do everything, because we also really care about like doing stuff well, but I think we will like dip our toes into the water of, sort of a new direction for us and just see if there's any interest there, or see if, our innate sort of skill with the other things that we kind of tackle crosses over into it, and allows for some sort of interesting possibilities.
Well, it's so relatable because, like, I think about how we really made our bread and butter. Here in Raleigh, there's just a lot of IT. And so as a result, the request was a lot of explainer videos. And at first, explainer videos, you can find a lot of variety. You can do things some different ways, and they're pretty exciting. But then after you get like 5 years in and people are asking for like the same type of explainer video, you're like, don't you guys want to try something different, And so, like, I remember having this thought a couple of years ago where we were looking at our portfolio, and it started to like feel really similar. And similarity was good. If you're a specialist, people come to you for a certain type of thing. But that, I don't know, for me, that's my personal opinion, that it might not be the most rewarding because, like you said, Colin, you get kind of burned out on that. And so I remember we really leaned in last year to saying like, all right, we're going to put some different work on our portfolio. We're going to try to do some more 3D stuff. We haven't been doing a ton of that. We were going to try to just mix up styles, but just trying to be different. And I feel like looking back on this past year and a half worth of work after having that conversation, it does feel more exciting because you're dabbling in new things and kind of bringing your experience with some of the old to the new. And so I can only imagine, like, from some of the branding projects you're doing, looking through that with a motion lens, looking through that with your past experience in motion, you're probably bringing a whole new thought process to some of these clients that really haven't thought about motion so much on the branding side of things as y'all have, which has got to be really cool.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty unique perspective to some of that stuff that traditionally you wouldn't sort of associate a motion design studio, tackling. And like you said, Mac, I think there's definitely like crossover there. There's sort of like some fundamental things that sort of exist across all projects that sort of apply.
Sometimes, like, particularly this year, and I think with things like slowing down, it just gave me a lot of time to sort of reflect on, what my creative career has been and kind of what I'm doing right now. And I've actually been working with NC State University here, doing some mentorship programs, and then we're also doing like I was helping with a student with his personal project that he was working on. But it just kind of reminds me, working with these kids, like, well, one, just like how much I wish I had like done a few things differently along the way. Like, when I was first coming out of school, I didn't have like any internship stuff like really lined up, because I was just like, whatever, I'm graduating, great, But like how now would have been like, oh yeah, you should be reaching out to studios you really like. You should just message people you care about. Just like having the ability to tell someone some different advice, that you wish you had done. I don't know. Looking back now, it's been 10 years with Oddfellows. Like, if you were doing this again, you think y'all would have done the same thing you did initially? Would there be any sort of advice you would provide for someone who's like thinking about starting their own studio? How about like red flags? I think one of the things that comes with like some seniority is like identifying trouble projects, I mean, I don't know if it's like, the one we've all heard is like, oh, you'll get so much exposure. It's like, no, you won't, or it's like, can you make this work? I swear we won't have that many revisions. And it's like, yes, you will. I don't know anything in that realm that is always a red flag that you like pay attention towards on requests that come in.
Yeah, that's a good one.
That's a good one.
or I mean, working for exposure or like on spec,
yeah.
Like promising influence or additional work. I mean, that's always like a big red flag. I think you have clients that do the sort of classic bait and switch, sort of what you sign up for isn't sort of what you get with a project. And I think having a strong SOW in place is a good starting point, although it doesn't always save you. But I think learning from those mistakes and, not expecting something different the next time around. I think saying no the next time if it wasn't a good experience for you is probably the thing to do.
I think that's a huge takeaway, is like a strong SOW. I remember the first time a client asked me to send an SOW, I was like, cool, yeah, no problem. This is like first week at Dash, and I remember Googling like, what's an SOW, like what's the statement of work? But yeah, it goes without saying, I think sometimes you can get so excited about a project and want to be moving forward, and particularly when a client's like, oh, we got this deadline, we need to push into it. It's like you really need to take a step back to make sure that, one, your statement of work is incredibly clear on what you're doing and what the ask is, because it's so much easier to look back on that when things are getting hairy towards the end of the project and there's more asks or changes and things like that, they can be like, no, this isn't what we agreed upon, versus saying like, I think we had that conversation over the phone. So I think that's a really great takeaway, is always make sure to get stuff in writing and be really clear on the expectations, and also not feeling bad to speak up, right? Like I always felt, and maybe it's just because I'm super soft and like, a nice people person, like to please everyone, but like I always struggled with like really pushing back, because you want to be accommodating. But I think it's important to remember as creatives that like you got to speak up for yourself, right? If you put something in writing, if you say you're going to do something a certain way, then that's the way that it needs to stay, unless they want to pay more money, and then you should speak up in those regards. So the SOW stuff is really good.
Yeah. Navigating those moments are totally an art form that a lot of our producers do really well. But it's tough, because SOW is sort of something to point back to, but it is, can be at times hard to completely enforce. So I think it is sort of a give and take, and sort of reading the room and figuring out how to protect your team, but also sort of respect kind of your commitment to the client, what you signed up for.
Well said. Well said. All right, so here's two deep, thought-provoking questions for you to kind of wrap this up before we can open it up for some questions. So the first one is, we'll say like 100 years from now, when people are talking about the story and the history of motion design, and they're just like, oh, let's talk about the greats from back in the day, and they're talking about Oddfellows. Like, how do y'all want to be remembered? Like, how is Oddfellows remembered in the future when the history books are written? When your studio crumbles next week, how do you want people?
when some young guns force us out into oblivion.
Yeah, so from one of the young guns who is listening, who's going to force y'all out soon, how do you want Oddfellows to be remembered? Like, what do you want people to think of your studio in the history books, you think?
That was a good one. I mean, I think for me, I just hope people remember us for making interesting work. That we push the boundaries to some extent, help kind of define the genre. When I think back on like what I'm proud about, though, it's not even really centered around the work. It's centered around kind of the people. So I hope people really remember us for just, treating people well and, celebrating the amazing folks behind the work.
No, that's really great. I kind of feel the same way, because like wherever you work, you get those little experiences, but every one of those experiences are like a little bit different where you are, whether you're like a student in studio or you get like, slightly different culture vibes at some of the different jobs you are. So it's like always nice to kind of look back at the experiences, particularly the good ones, on the people that you work with, because it like really makes even tough projects not seem as tough when you're there with like really good people, and you can kind of joke around on or kind of lean on each other to get through it. Not to like say it's like war stories or stuff, but like, when you're really with like good people, I mean, it just helps so much, and it really makes like, tough projects feel a lot smoother. So that's really good.
Yeah, I think the relationships you kind of forge at the studio definitely like are longer lasting than the work. Although it would be nice to be, have a few pieces kind of rolling around that people still talk about
later on. Yeah, that'd be really cool. All right, well, I want to open it up to a few questions from anyone who's listening, if anyone has some thoughts. And while people are maybe thinking about their questions and want to raise their hands, I have a few questions from our Instagram poll that we put out the other day, just to see what folks would say. One of our followers asked, how do you measure success? So how would y'all say you measure success? I guess that's so broad. It could be like success of a designer, success of a studio, whatever interests y'all for that question as far as measuring success.
Well, there's maybe like how we would answer it like personally, and then maybe more as a studio. I think personally, it's probably, like answering yes to the question of like, do I still love this? Right?
Yeah.
Do my gut still like tingle a little bit when like a good brief comes across the desk? Does it sort of keep me up at night? And is it like an opportunity to sort of like make the best thing I've ever made? If I still feel that kind of like stir, I think that's still success, and a good indicator of that, I still love what I do.
That's success. And then ultimate success is making the best thing you can make while also enjoying the best cheeseburger you've ever had.
Exactly.
That's right. That's the
that
ultimate.
$20 cheeseburger. It's just that's what the dreams are.
That's what the dreams are.
Those two things.
I can't wait to see you again, Chris, and buy you a cheeseburger.
And then I think like as a studio, probably it's, like, are we providing our employees with the opportunities to feel the same way about the work? Are we living up to our promise of providing a fun, kind of nurturing, supportive environment for them? And, and then are we sort of like honoring our commitments to our clients, right? Giving them sort of the thoughtfulness and craft that kind of the projects deserve.
No, that's a good point. And it actually transitions well into this other question that someone asked. We touched on it a little bit earlier, so it may be a little redundant, but it said, before you were established as you are now, how did you gain the trust of some of those big brands? So I don't know if there was maybe like an initial project that helped with it, or maybe from the agency vibe that you came from that kind of brought in that trust. But how do you feel like you gained trust of big brands initially?
I mean, our process, like looking back, was not so great, but it was so much better than working through an agency. I think there's sort of this game of telephone that happens, between client through producers to creative director one to creative director two to eventually the artist. I think having these sort of relationships where the client is talking directly to sort of the person that's also doing the work, I just think it was very streamlined. Although from our perspective, I think also doing the work and then sort of directing the project, sometimes we'd be a little too attached to what we were doing, which made, feedback sort of hard to take in certain moments. Luckily, Chris has, incredible patience and can step in during those moments where I would get very frustrated.
Chris steps in, Colin steps out of the room.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's great.
Exactly.
I love it. Yeah, I don't know I guess in our side of things, I guess Corey's the good cop and I'm the bad cop. I usually typically come in and have to be like, all right, we got to do this. I'm sorry. This is not fun, creative stuff, but we got to knock it out. And Corey's like, well, maybe we could push back a little bit. We could just let him do this. I'll let y'all just do this. He comes in after me trying to be the good cop, make me look bad.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it was funny. Like, when Chris and I were first starting out as directors, I think we thought, when we were sort of communicating a problem or a reason for why we did something, it was very centered around, well, it's just better, isn't it just clear? Like aesthetically, like it's just so much better. And then
it's really obvious, right?
Yeah, it's very obvious. And I think we quickly realized that like taste is just, all over the place. And
it's so subjective.
It's so subjective that like, saying that and using that as an avenue for explaining why something was good is just a terrible idea. And so you really have to like put it into perspective and sort of explain it from, how is this solving the problem and why is this solving the problem better? And I think as soon as we sort of learned that, I think we had more legs to stand on,
Well, it's so funny because it's like, even at the end of the day, no matter how hard you present something, you're like, oh, these are all the reasons. This makes so much sense. Client can just be like, nah, that's all right. We'll just go this way. And you're like, cool. I didn't prepare for this meeting and write down all these things, Oh, that's really funny. All right, let's see. I think we got time for maybe like one more. And then, here we go. We got one question from the audience. Yes, Marin, a producer coming in to ask a question. I love it. She's going to be real intense here. Give us a good one, Marin. Welcome to the show. Hey y'all, thanks again for joining us for Mograph Lunch. As a reminder, this is just the first part of a longer conversation that happens every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time on Clubhouse. We'll continue the NPG conversation as we talk about news, projects, and general industry advice. And then we'll open up the door on Clubhouse to answer questions live, interact with some of your peers, and get to know some of the folks in the industry. Follow the link below for more information, and we will see you next week.